Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome to Law You Should Know. Today we'll be talking about eligibility for Medicaid and why it can be very helpful and important. Our guest is attorney Aaron Futterman, and he's with the law firm of Futterman and Lanza, and they're in Smithtown, New York, and they also have offices in Valley Stream, Southampton, and Babylon. And not only is he an attorney, but he's a CPA, and his firm concentrates in the areas of elder law and estate planning. Aaron, welcome to Law You Should Know.
Hi, welcome. Thank you.
And people hear about it all the time and in different contexts, but why is Medicaid? Explain what Medicaid is and why it can be so important to our listeners.
Oh, yeah. I could go on for quite some time, but to put it in a nutshell, when families have a loved one that's, heaven forbid, going into a nursing home, they're overwhelmed with all sorts of emotion, and they're getting beat up by doctors' reports, and the nursing home, quite honestly, is a business, and that business costs, for most people on Long Island, the average is about $15,000 a month. So on top of having their husband, their wife, their mother, father in a nursing home being cared for, they're being asked to pay a bill close to $15,000 a month. It's financially devastating for most folks on Long Island. And Medicaid is a way to alleviate or pay for it so that people don't have to get financially destroyed. The other thing that Medicaid, and maybe we'll have some time to talk about it, is that Medicaid will also pay for people who don't quite reach the level of nursing home needs, but have a need perhaps for assistance in their home. And Medicaid has a wonderful program called Community-Based Medicaid, which would pay an agency to send home health aides to the house for folks that, have certain needs, maybe, help in the shower or in the bathroom, maybe dressing themselves and helping them with meals. And Medicaid, or the community Medicaid, would pay for these kinds of services, and as well as other things. So, and it's every day. It's all day long. It's incredible how pervasive these issues and problems are.
And people may think they're okay, they have health insurance or they have Medicare, but Medicare or health insurance will not cover these benefits on a long-term basis.
Oh, absolutely. That's not exactly true, but it's mostly true. What often happens is that someone will end up going to the nursing home, and if that person had been in a hospital, admitted in the hospital for at least 3 consecutive evenings, and then released directly from the hospital to the nursing home, Medicare, not Medicaid, Medicare would be available to pick up at most 100 days. And one of the myths out there is that, that automatically someone would be entitled to get 100 days, and the real answer is you could get up to 100 days. You're not guaranteed 100 days, but you could get 100 days paid for by Medicare. The first 20 days would be paid in full. Days 21 through 100, there's a copay of about $170 a day. But beyond the 100 days, that's where that, if the person remains in the nursing home, it's about $15,000 a month, and on average. Although it's funny, I was working with a family. It's not actually funny. It's funny, peculiar that mom had dementia issues, and and I'll say that she also had some other issues which required a ventilator, and this family had been privately paying over $21,000 a month. So it gets financially devastating, and the Medicaid is available to pay. And you're right, and Medicare only has a limited benefit, and health insurance oftentimes doesn't have much coverage, if any at all, with regards to skilled nursing care.
Now, what are some of the qualifications for Medicaid? It's sort of financial need based. So,
Sure.
does someone have to have any other qualifications besides financial need?
Sure. In order to be eligible for chronic care Medicaid, number one, you have to have a need. You have to be in the nursing home with a need to be there. Number two, you're right, you have to be financially eligible, which of course means that, and most people kind of know this, you have to be seen by Medicaid as if you're poor. Well, what's poor? It means that the applicant this year, and it just changed in January, could have assets in their name no greater than $15,450. It went up a whopping $300 from last year.
And this would include real estate or cars?
Well, great question. So the question, people often say $15,450. That doesn't seem like a lot. Does that count everything? And the answer is, yeah, counts everything. When Medicaid is determining if you are above or below the resource allowance. But there are 6 things that an applicant can own that don't count, and they are, number one, personal effects, and, your jewelry, the lady's fur coat or something like that. And, I always mention this because it seems silly, but I had a client many years ago who was the worst type of Medicaid applicant, meaning mentally she was totally with it. She was totally fine. And she knew that she was going into the nursing home because physically she was in awful shape and she needed to be there. And she was terribly upset because she was fearful that Medicaid somehow was going to take or require her to give up this family china that she inherited from her mother and from her mother's mother and so on. And I told her, no, don't worry about it. They're not interested in your personal effects. So number one of 6 things, personal property, they don't count. Number 2, the applicant could own a car, 1 automobile. Number 3, an applicant could own a burial plot. I often say, isn't that nice? They let you keep your burial plot. But it does have a value, and whatever that is, Medicaid doesn't count it against the applicant. Number 4, the applicant, kind of related to number 3, they could own a prepaid funeral trust. And, this is where folks sometimes will go to the family funeral parlor and prearrange and prepay for their final send-off. Whatever they set aside doesn't count against that $15,450 resource allowance. Number 5, this is where it starts to get a little trickier. The first 4 things, if you own these things, they just simply don't count. Number 5 of 6 things that don't count is qualified retirement accounts if we put them into a regular monthly payout status. So, first, what's a qualified retirement account? This is your IRA, your 401k, these tax-deferred accounts, which oftentimes are, quite significant. And so the classic example is, son calls me, tells me that mom's going into the nursing home. And I say, well, let's explore if Medicaid would be available. And I say, well, what does mom own? And he tells me, everything's gone but for mom's IRA. And I say, how much is in there? He tells me, well, there's $100,000 in there. Well, if we did nothing and applied for Medicaid, mom would be over-resourced. It's well above the $15,450 threshold. However, if we tell the institution that holds the IRA to start paying mom a regular monthly distribution, Medicaid, based on, depending on which county you're in, whether it's, the RM, the required minimum distribution, or Suffolk County has their own tables. if they pay a regular monthly amount, they will ignore the principal balance from counting against mom. So a quite significant asset could be excluded from the person's resources. Number 6 of 6 things that doesn't count is the applicant's primary residence. Although I always tell people this is a trap. So again, example, son calls me, mom's going into the nursing home, and I say, well, what does mom own? And he tells me, well, mom only owns the house. I go, that's it? Yes, everything's gone. You know, mom spent her money long ago. My sister and I, we help mom pay the taxes, the landscaper, but, everything's gone but for the house. I go, all right, well, how much is the house worth? And the son tells me, well, funny you should ask. Mom's house was just appraised at $750,000. And I say, okay, well, that's it? And he goes, yeah, that's it. And I say to him, well, we can apply for Medicaid, and Medicaid will pay. And then this is where I usually see the question marks flying out of his head. And he says, wait a minute. I just told you that my mom owns a house worth $750,000. She's eligible for Medicaid, and Medicaid will pay. I go, yeah, that's right. But here's the trap. Medicaid will pay, and they'll pay every month, but they'll put a lien on this house, and they'll keep a running tally of what they're paying for mom. And they'll pay until mom is gone. And when mom is gone, that's when they'll sue her estate and recover from the value of the house. So the last thing, the primary residence, it doesn't count against the applicant while they're alive. When they're gone, reality, they're going to try to get their money back from mom's estate. And as a matter of fact, they just raised the amount of equity someone can have in their house, and they always do this every January. They change the figures. Someone could have equity in a house upwards of $878,000, and it doesn't count, except they'll try to get it after mom is gone. So, the second test to Medicaid eligibility is you have to, look, quote-unquote, poor. And does everything count against you? Yes, but for, the 6 things, the personal effects, car, burial plot.
Okay. We have to take a short break now. When we return, hopefully you'll tell our listeners how to get around that problem on number 6.
Okay.
If there's a way, and other considerations and trying to become eligible for Medicaid.
Okay.
We're talking with Aaron Futterman, and he's with the law firm of Futterman and Lanza, and they have offices in Smithtown, Southampton, Valley Stream, and Babylon, and they concentrate their practice in elder law and estate planning. You're listening to Law You Should Know here on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College, and also over the internet at nccradio.org. We'll be back in a moment.
This program is brought to you by Nassau Community College, which offers a paralegal studies program. Students can major in paralegal studies while earning their associate's degree, or earn a paralegal certificate if they already have a college degree. These programs can even help you start a second career as a paralegal. It's a program for anyone who wants to work in a law office assisting lawyers, the government, or a position in an insurance company. More information about full-time, part-time, days, evenings, weekends, or online courses is available by calling 516-572-7774 or by email at paralegal@ncc.edu.
Once again, we continue with Law You Should Know. From the Mineola Law Firm of Shane, Dox, Denise, Corker, and Sauer, here is attorney Kenneth J. Landau.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome back to Law You Should Know. We're in the middle of a very interesting discussion with attorney and CPA Aaron Futterman about qualifying for Medicaid. Aaron, you were telling us about the things that Medicaid looks at, and and why Medicaid is such a good program. So very quickly, because we only have a limited amount of time, how can you help someone try to protect their house if they're going to be covered by Medicaid?
Sure. So we were talking about how to become eligible for Medicaid, and real quick, to qualify, you have to have a need, you have to look poor, and that's where we kind of got stuck at a break. And then number 3 is a rule that most people have read or heard about, which is the look-back transfer penalty rule, which is a 5-year look-back. And basically what this says is when someone applies for Medicaid, they require that the applicant submit financial records for the immediately preceding 5 years, all 60 months. Every bank statement, tax return, etc. must be disclosed. Why? Because Medicaid is looking to see if someone gave things away in the last 5 years. Well, why are they interested in that? Well, they punish people that give things away in the last 5 years because they assume that people gave things away or gifted things away in the last 5 years to try to look poor and pass test number 2 to qualify for Medicaid. So when people do planning, especially for the house, one of the things that often comes up is using a legal mechanism called a trust to transfer ownership of the house from mom and dad into the trust, hopefully more than 5 years prior to ever needing a skilled nursing home and needing to apply for Medicaid. And the type of trust that helps is what's known as an irrevocable trust. And I hate the title of it because that word irrevocable scares people from doing something that is wise and thoughtful. But really, the way that this trust works is, and it's funny, it's irrevocable, and the law describes how a trust must be designed to be irrevocable. And then New York State law shortly thereafter describes how you can revoke an irrevocable trust. So the title spooks people, but the way that the trust works is that when someone puts, how about I back up? A trust I always describe as just some fancy legal papers that the client and I create that creates the elements and relationship amongst 4 things or 4 elements of the trust: the grantor, the trustee, the beneficiaries, and the house or whatever property we're looking to protect. Mom and dad, the grantor, appoint the trustee, probably the kids. What do they retitle into the trust? Their house. Who are the beneficiaries? And then usually the parents say, the kids are. And I go, no. I go, you are. This trust holds the house for mom and dad's benefit for as long as they're alive. Only when they're gone, then the kids act or jump into the role of successor beneficiaries. And then clients say, well, what happens if I put my house in the trust and I want to sell it? Then I say, all right, well, tell the kids to sell it. On behalf of the trust, as trustees, the trust will sell it, the trust will get the money, and then the trust will buy your new, smaller house. The idea with the trust is that hopefully mom and dad have put assets, the house or whatever, that they're looking to protect into this trust, and 5 years go by, right? Because that's the look-back period. It has to be in the trust greater than 5 years ago. And the irrevocable part says that when mom and dad put the house into the trust, the trustee, by design, is never permitted to retitle the house back to mom and dad. And then again, they start getting unsteady on their feet and they get upset. And I say, so what? And they go, what do you mean, so what? That's my house. And I say, so what? I go, the trust holds it for your benefit. And then they say, well, what if I want to sell it? I said, I just told you, tell your kids to sell it. Well, what if they don't listen to me? And I say, if the trust is designed right, even though this is irrevocable, if your son, the trustee's not listening, then you'll remove him as trustee and put your daughter in, or whoever you like. You can change the trustees, even though this is a irrevocable trust. And if your son has really angered you, you may want to consider taking him out as a beneficiary as well. And you have that ability, even though this is irrevocable. Of course, the other questions that they're always worried about is, will I still get my veterans exemption? Will I still get my star, my enhanced star? And the answer is, of course. So the trust is a wonderful vehicle to protect the home, but the most important ingredient of the trust is the ingredient of time, more specifically 5 years worth of time.
And what if somehow the trust sells it before the 5 years? The Medicaid may be able to claw back some of the money?
Nope. Well, again, it depends. If we put the house in the trust and someone is then going into the nursing home prior to making the 5 years, is that the question,
yes.
Really? And if that's the question, it depends on what the facts are. Because, all right, here's the Murphy luck, right? So Mr. and Mrs. Murphy, they create the trust, and they go, Aaron, let me tell you about our luck. 4 years and 10 months are going to go by. That's when I'm going to fall down the steps, and that's when I'm going to need the nursing home. And I say, all right, well, you win. Aaron, you weren't listening. I said it was 4 years and 10 months. We almost made the 5 years. We didn't quite make it. We made 4 years and 10 months. And I go, Mr. Murphy, you win. So how do we win? I mean, you're not really winning if you're going to the nursing home, but you win, or your family wins more specifically, because now the family only has to privately pay for the nursing home for 2 months. If the family privately pays for 2 months, then we'll apply for Medicaid, because now it has been 5 years. Obviously it works if we're close to the 5 years. If we put it in the trust and only, 2 weeks go by, we haven't really accomplished much. However, it also depends on, who's around, because one of the biggest exceptions to the 5-year look-back transfer penalty rule is if mom and dad create the trust and 2 weeks later dad falls ill and needs the nursing home, we would collapse the trust, put the house back into mom and dad's name, only to put it into mom's name and transfer all of dad's assets that are in his name or joint with his wife to his wife. And if we did that today in January, February 1, next month, dad's eligible for Medicaid. And then usually the wife and kids go, what? You're telling me my dad could give everything to mom and next month he's eligible for Medicaid? I go, yeah, that's right. They go, what about the 5-year look back? I go, yeah, they're going to see it. However, biggest exception to the 5-year look back penalty rule, transfers between spouses. They'll see it, but it's not going to punish dad.
And that's only between spouses, not between a spouse and a child who might have been like a co-owner of the house.
Well, that's a good question, and the answer to that is that there's actually a couple of other exceptions. The second exception is transfers of a home, or quite honestly any asset, to a disabled child. So if, heaven forbid, a child were disabled, and it's funny, what's a disabled child? It's defined as a child that receives Social Security disability. And I've had cases where, kids come walking in and they don't outwardly look any different than, anyone else. But I had one guy who was a New York City fireman, and this was exactly the guy you wanted to see on a ladder if you had to jump out of a burning building. But, he had had a heart attack. He was on disability. His mom was going into the nursing home. And I was able to tell him, you can play hero again, because everything mom has, we could transfer to you today, and next month she's eligible. Why? Because the second exception to the 5-year look-back penalty rule is transfers to a disabled child. And the third exception is a more narrow exception, and that is transfers of a home to a quote-unquote caretaker child. What's a caretaker child? This is normally the daughter that moves in with mom or dad and helps them out. So long as the daughter has changed their residence and is there for 2 years as their residence, then mom can transfer the house to this caretaker child. They don't need a special nursing degree or medical certificate. It's just the fact that they help mom and dad out or mom out.
And they're physically present. They're
right.
Living there.
Exactly. They're considered a caretaker child, and the house could be transferred to that child.
So it's almost like a gift to that child.
That's right. And people say, how could it be that easy? And why do they do this? And I say, well, this is one of these things that the law rewards this child because presumably this child has prevented mom from falling, and she might have been in the nursing home years earlier, and maybe society was paying for her in the form of Medicaid for many more years than, when she finally did go in it.
We only have a moment or two left in the program, but that's a lesser known exception.
Yes.
And and what about in terms of immigration status? Do you have to be a citizen? Do you have to be have a green card?
Well, certainly, yeah. You do have to, have a green card, and sometimes, depending on the type of service we're looking for Medicaid, immigration status definitely becomes an issue. And they certainly ask about it, and they certainly ask you to provide proof of citizenship, whether naturalization, resident alien. They're definitely interested in it. Although services are often available. And I want to mention real quick before we do run out of time that there is also that benefit of community Medicaid, which is a hidden gem in New York State that would pay for not only just home health aides in the house, supplies. It would pay the 20% copay for Medicare, whether that's at a doctor's office or at a hospital. It's a very valuable benefit.
And Aaron, we're just about out of time. Do you have to meet all those qualifications to get community Medicaid as well?
They're very similar to chronic Medicaid, with one big exception: the look-back period, where there's a 5-year look-back period for the nursing home type Medicaid. The look-back period for community Medicaid is 0, meaning you can give everything away today.
And you could start the clock running on the other Medicaid, so maybe you can survive at home for 5 years and then qualify for the nursing home.
You could, yeah. Listen, hopefully you never have to go anywhere, and maybe you could just stay in your house the rest of your life, God willing.
And maybe your child can move in at that time so that you'll only have to sit it out for 2 years. I wish we had some more time, but I'd like to thank Aaron Futterman for being our guest, and he has offices all over Suffolk County, and he has a website, trustedattorneys.com, where you can find out more information about what we've been discussing. And he's with the firm of Futterman and Lanza in Smithtown. And you're listening to Law You Should Know here on 90.3 WHPC. And if you missed any part of this program, the podcast is available at nccradio.org. Please join us this time next week for another program on Law You Should Know.